let's get through this. This being a necessary little video about some unnecessarily nasty little people. You see, from the moment I began posting videos on YouTube, those clowns who appointed their unqualified selves to leadership positions in the online atheist and skeptical movement have been very interested in who I am, where I live, and where I work. I imagine in the mighty Wurlitzer of pure ideological bullshit that is the People's Republic of Atheist Skeptistan, this is the only form of actual intellectual curiosity they're allowed. So let's talk about these clowns. They're not happy clowns or depressing hobo clowns. They're not pretentious being and nothingness performed on a trampoline Eurotrash clowns. Not scary but fictional clowns, or even a real-life killer clown who turned his basement into an unofficial gay cemetery. I'm not even talking about my personal formative experience with a painting of a big-eyed clown hung on my wall when I was 6 years old, which made it necessary to climb the dresser every night so I could turn it face down before I could go to sleep. Seriously, that shit still creeps me out. I'm not even going to talk about the only clown I like and respect.
I don't think so. Homie don't play that.
No. First off, I have to tell you about this clown.
You know, the human brain is a female brain that has been damaged by testosterone at various stages in his life.
Laden. Now, Laden's activities are usually so poorly executed and overtly creepy, and he's been so enthusiastic in his harassing and threatening of people, with all the dedication of Wile E. Coyote catching roadrunners, that even the awesome social justice, greater good ad hoc immunity field couldn't provide cover for his brand of pathological incompetence. When he's not doxing and harassing people and then filling some sad psychological need by openly bragging about it just so everyone knows what a badass he thinks he is, Laden is just semi-literate enough to claim to be a Harvard-educated anthropologist, and he tells stories about his time spent in the Congo region of Africa. I'm sure they miss him there, if only because just north, even Nigerian 419 scam artists need someone to look down on. I was vaguely aware of Laden's existence from stories of his doxing and harassing of unapologetic virus cheerleader Abby Smith, where he actually claimed her Nat Geo blog ERV was a hate site, and also his threatening and provoking of his own fellow Freethought bloggers such as Justin Griffiths. However, Laden, despite his rampant egomania, exists within the bullying food chain as little more than a joke. As I said, the guy is Wile E. Coyote, and so thus far his overblown ego and overestimation of his own cunning hasn't worked out all that well for him.
Wile E. Coyote, super genius.
In terms of lulz, however, he's a gift to the fucking universe. So not long after I began posting videos, Laden and the people he associates with became interested in not what I said or the points that I made or in even pulling the "that's not funny" rebuttal, but in who I was in a way that just wasn't healthy. Laden would pop onto Twitter, and the same guy who damn near stalked Abby Smith began tweeting that I was a harasser of women, ostensibly for criticizing women who he felt should be exempt from criticism. And he proposed that unless I give him a notorious doxer and harasser my name and address so I could be held accountable, then I was an abject coward. In that, he was unable to get satisfaction from me because, after all, getting attacked by Greg Laden is like being savaged by a yappy little dog with mange. The only dilemma you face is picking which corner to kick it into. And as you will see, I was rather too nice in applying my foot. So, acting like his brain was damaged by testosterone, Laden did what, well, Laden does. Apparently, Laden found some information from one of a couple of old doxings from about 2005. I'm not sure if he was cribbing off some right-wing eliminationists or some butthurt members of the now-defunct Project for the Old American Century Forum, but I consider those matters long since closed. He managed to dig up an old Democratic Underground post where a person who made the error of pointing out that my then-wife would be easy to spot, apparently unaware of all the ways I could interpret that remark, reacted badly to my heartfelt offer to hunt him down like vermin should anyone ever make good on that threat. Once again, Laden is totally against the harassing of women, except, of course, when it's women who he thinks has it coming, either through their own actions or association with someone like me. Now, through the JREF, I communicated a long time ago with the person who wrote that long-expired Democratic Underground post, and we have no hard feelings. I know, it's shocking, but people get all pissed off and say dumb shit they don't really mean in the middle of internet flame wars. You know, I was almost tempted to put up a picture of my ex-wife when she was recovering from a resection following colon cancer, but I realized doing so might give people like Laden the impression that she's now fair game. So just picture this. A 97-pound woman who graduated from Beijing University, did her time in the People's Liberation Army, and got her MA at Johns Hopkins, talking from a hospital bed, a phone against each ear and her BlackBerry on her lap, still conducting business for the K Street LLC she works for. In other words, I'm not worried about her because she would chew Laden up and in bed spat out bone fragments into the wall. But the other danger of doing that is, of course, that according to the Atheism Plus crowd, everything a detractor says must be viewed in the worst possible light. So my referencing my ex-wife would be interpreted not as Greg Laden and his fellow travelers potentially harassing a cancer survivor. No, we would get a blog post from Ophelia Benson, 95% of which would be cut and pasted quotes from other people, accusing me of being cynical and using a cancer survivor for my own nefarious ends. You just can't win. The other people who just can't win are the poor, unsuspecting family living at that address, incorrectly tied to me, who will now fall under attack from a crack squad of Freethought blog commandos, when and if they get around to it. Instead of getting all bent out of shape over Laden doing what he seems psychologically compelled to do, I did get my revenge of sorts by hitting him right in the soft spot, which is not only right between his ears, but also at his fragile little ego. One of the few things Greg Laden has to be proud of is a crappy little vanity ebook he has listed on Amazon.com. Suffice to say, Greg Laden writes like penguins fly. Honestly, if you took a handful of those magnetized poetry word tiles you can buy in actual bookstores and flung a handful of them at your refrigerator, what stuck, even if some of the words landed upside down, would make a lot more sense than Laden's syntax. At one time, the book had but one 5-star review, and that simply stank of quid pro quo. All I did was draw attention to Laden's work and encourage people to write honest reviews. As those subsequent reviews reveal, Laden was forced to offer people free copies of the book, a $4.99 value, in an attempt to buy positive reviews. Eventually, Laden tried to give the impression that he was waving the white flag, assuring me that he was done harassing me, apparently because he's capable of doing basic cost-benefit analysis. But he added the bizarre caveat that he was unable to control his allies who might harass me. All this means is that, within the echo chamber, Laden did a handoff. Generally, the first handoff goes to ardent Laden supporter Stephanie Zvan. Zvan found her little slice of victimhood in a one-off tweet I did mocking the odd symbiotic relationship between her and Greg Laden with reference to the Laden-Zvan sex tape, which linked to a cheesy little GIF animation of a little dog enthusiastically humping a cow who barely notices he's there. Of course, for the purposes of narrative formation, Zvan tried her best to make it seem as if I'm really claiming there's a Zvan-Laden sex tape, rather than just a GIF animation. If there was a Laden-Zvan sex tape, I imagine it would be like a weaponized version of the VHS tape in The Ring, and it wouldn't take nearly 7 days to kill you. Anyway, failing that, she launched into an entire post entitled "Still Not Disagreement," in which she attempted to make the case of how obsessed I was with her by going through my tweets with a fine-tooth comb and picking out tweets divested of context and often having nothing to do with her to show what a vile little person I was. One of my most ominous and terrifying tweets, of course, was my threat of using nuclear weapons. All of which led to a shitload of discussion about absolutely nothing and raises the question, how many Freethought bloggers does it take to change a light bulb? Answer, stop threatening me. But note this part of the narrative formation. What Zvan objects to is that I'm mocking her rather than disagreeing with her with all due respect she thinks she deserves, conveniently ignoring the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, she isn't due any respect. Zvan's support for Laden seems to be absolute and unconditional. However, Stephanie Zvan is an asshole in her own right. If you recall, the thing that got me involved in the Great Schism and that I based my first video on was when a group of Atheism Plus supporters, which included Atheism Plus forum member Sitar and the now infamous Sasha Wiley Shaw, who descended on John the Other in Vancouver, box cutters in hand and bullshit rationalizations at the ready, to deny him the right to post flyers promoting human rights for all, including men, which they regarded, as usual, as hate speech. Most people who actually give a shit about the opinions of others would distance themselves from that kind of goon squad mob action. But Zvan distanced herself from that kind of behavior in the same way she distances herself from Laden's doxing and harassment, by wholeheartedly supporting it. In Stephanie Zvan's world, the kind of respect she believes she deserves would require anterior-grade amnesia after each and every interaction with her. It's the only way one could approach Zvan and disagree with her, by being completely oblivious to the stupid shit she said or the nasty things she condoned previously. What really seems to piss off people like Laden, Benson, Zvan, or anyone who got a mention in one of my videos is this little guy who's been the face of all things Mike-Roo for over a decade now. Let me back up a bit. You see, back in the mid-90s, I lived in the middle of bejesus nowhere, Arizona. The only paved road was a long run of Highway 68 that stretched from Kingman to Bullhead City. My then girlfriend and I had a bunch of dogs, which wasn't that difficult to do because for some sick reason, transients, snowbirds, just soulless fuckers were always abandoning their dogs along that road. We would take the dogs in and with the help of a friendly vet and a friendly pet shop owner, fix them up and find homes for them. So here I am back in the pre-hipster ironic days with a evil spot goatee. With me is Rusty, who was rescued as a puppy from a cardboard box left on the shoulder of the highway. Not only was Rusty one of the most intelligent dogs I've ever met, but she had a certified cast iron stomach. One Christmas, she managed to acquire and consume an entire bag of holiday-wrapped Hershey's Kisses, foil and all. Which I suppose isn't that remarkable, but the red, green, and silver disco Santa shit she squeezed out the next day, that was the stuff of legend. Normally, you wouldn't be able to call people over for a look at a dog turd, but in the midday sun, it beckoned like the Holy Grail. We took in a dog, Sadie, who had been hit by a car and had a badly broken leg. We got her well and found a home for her, but because she was pregnant when we found her, not before she dumped a herd of puppies on us. One of the keepers from that litter was my dog, Daisy, who, in a manner of speaking, is still hanging out with me. So anyway, one day back then, my girlfriend looks out the window into the yard and asks, "What in hell's name are the dogs playing with?" You see, we lived adjacent to Bureau of Land Management land used by welfare ranchers to raise cattle. In terms of resources and success, raising cattle in that desert made about as much sense as growing oranges on Mars. At best, it cut a couple of steps out of curing beef jerky. Often, very often, the cattle would fail to thrive, and then you could smell the sickly sweet stink of a non-thriving cattle rotting somewhere off in the scrub. So the dogs are rolling something around, running with it, stealing it back and forth. My first impression was that it was some sort of completely trashed Nerf football, the cover weathered down to the pink foam insides. Except footballs don't have eye sockets. They had recovered the putrid, mostly defleshed, and jawless skull of a cow, and they were having such a wonderful time with it, no one, least of all me, had the heart to take it from them. That fucking disgusting cow skull kicked around forever. I mean, the dogs didn't mind. They snacked on sun-dried roadkill. The great time they were having got transferred to the cow skull itself, which I christened the Happy Fun Time Dead Cow Head. Perhaps inspired by all the fun a dog could have with one, the cow skull had some mental staying power, which eventually became this. He's cute, he's personable, and most importantly, he's just dead sexy. So, there's that. Also, there's a perfectly innocent reason why the little guy is holding a knife behind his back. Namely, killing hitchhikers with a ball-peen hammer is far too messy. Word. Anyway, hold on to the thought of bizarre canine behavior, because I'm going to come back to that. Now, most people don't care if you write and critique anonymously or behind a pseudonym, because what's supposed to be important is the argument itself, not the person making it. That, however, is an idea alien to the Atheism Plus folks, who have to routinely check the race, sex, and most importantly, status in their pecking order of the person making an argument before they know whether or not they should agree with it. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Dillahunty. Also, stop recording videos while you're driving, you buffoon. Anonymity is an obstacle if you want to accuse someone of all manner of dubious shit. Being a misogynist, a rape apologist, a stalker, a communist sympathizer, or a witch. Whatever buzzword you can think of for the purpose of shutting them up. Of course, if these clowns could bring back pressing people to death, they would. I mean, think of how P.Z. Myers runs his sad little fiefdom. Now there's a guy who shouldn't be allowed in spitting distance of any real power. The only reason at all that someone would dox someone else is as an attempt to silence them through intimidation. Not argue with them, not engage in the market of ideas. It's still not disagreement, but to do an end run around all that and go for at least the threat that they will go after you, your friends, your relatives, your job, mostly through the pernicious lies and slanders that has come to be a signature feature of the sort of activism practiced by these clowns. Now, obviously, the doxing and harassment is meaningless unless you have something you can accuse the person being doxed and harassed of. And really, standard operating procedure for these clowns is, when in doubt, they are more than happy to shove their arms in up to the elbow and pull something straight out of their ass. Which brings me to Ophelia Benson, who is really the craziest rat in the shithouse that is Freethought blogs. She has absolutely no compunction about making shit up, weaving a threat narrative out of whole cloth, of constantly referencing threats and violence so often that you can almost feel her disappointment when it never comes to pass. If Greg Laden is Wile E. Coyote, then the best way to understand Benson's shtick is this.
What's all the hubbub? Bub.
These blockbuster bombs don't go off unless you hit them just right.
Way back in October, from the moment I got on Ophelia Benson's radar, she started doing what, well, she does, which is constructing entirely bogus threat narratives. Here she is in Twitter with a couple of minions, Aratina Cage, who runs a Twitter mass blocking campaign that exploits the Twitter spam algorithm resulting in critics having their accounts suspended, and Ulan, who is a slimy little shit. It's Aratina Cage that really stretches it, describing my videos as personalized terrorism, whatever that means. Ulan thinks I'm paranoid for registering my domain micro.com without using my real name. Obviously, someone whose real name is apparently Ulan would find that suspicious. I'm not sure which video they're talking about, perhaps the Atheism Plus Social Justice update, where I reference Rebecca Watson's Humanists of Florida speech, nor are they clear about what threats I supposedly made in that video. That's because what you're watching here is Benson and her little helpers engaging in fabulous circular reasoning, assuming the very thing they're trying to prove. This is a little slice of threat narrative being cobbled together in real time. Aside from nattering about whose sock puppet I am and how I obviously long for physical violence, they've got very little to build the necessary threat narrative on. Luckily, Ophelia Benson provides the evidence that I'm a violent threat, the tone of my voice, which is obviously all violent and ragey to someone with Benson's special sensitivity to these sort of things. I wasn't aware that my voice was all ragey and violent. I thought I was simply speaking with sufficient volume to be understood, especially over background music, and enunciating so as to overcome my tendency to trip over my own tongue. So I probably need elocution lessons from someone who knows.
I think that's stirring the pot, at least not if stirring the pot is a bad thing. I think that's, that's fairly close to my attitude, is that, yeah, it seems like a good thing, and I don't have a problem with signing on to it, but I'm also somewhat wait and see about it, about the extent to which I want to think of it as a different thing, as a departure from what we were doing before, and as you say, whether the label is actually useful or not. I think stirring the pot is sort of what we're doing. I mean, in this hangout, and also just in the broader discussion that's been going on for the past week.
Okay, I'm taking notes here. Say and you know, and qualifiers like I think a lot. Rock around in my chair like I'm Ray Charles pivoting on a large hemorrhoid. Don't actually say anything and speak in ever-decreasing concentric circles until I disappear up my own asshole. What's not so amusing is that Ophelia Benson is the catalyst for some of the worst tendencies of the Atheism Plus and Freethought blogs crowd, including doxing, because she began talking about it early, and violent rhetoric, because it's impossible for Benson to have any discussion without attempting to win by default by claiming she or others are under threat, even if she has to pull it out of the ether. This little remark I find not funny at all. Benson's claim that I intended to shoot Rebecca Watson. Only someone who has led a sheltered little life could throw a claim like that around so casually. As someone who's been touched by violence, I don't appreciate that sort of remark one little bit. Not only was I stabbed and had my face broken in my 20s by a group of bikers offended by my Japanese motorcycle, but I lost a friend who tried to leave her alcoholic and abusive husband, who shot her 5 times in the back of the head in front of her 2.5-year-old daughter. I won't go into detail because I realize trying to connect on any human level with Ophelia Benson is at best a massive waste of time, and at worst, just more grist for her mill. Benson does this sort of thing and then, like the rest, expects to be treated with respect. Late in the process of doing this video, I happened to be watching an episode of Hoarders, which made me wonder if what we are dealing with in Ophelia Benson is more than just cynicism.
Before people have really even criticized her, she's already anticipating that type of thought process coming from somebody else towards her.
You know, I'm not some freaking idiot. I can have any kind of crazy attitude I want. I still am entitled to respect.
In choosing between cynicism and neurosis, why not both? The threat narrative is essential to the way the clown car operates, and the threat narrative clown horn they continually honk is not only capital, but cover. The threat narrative assures freethought bloggers and skeptics of their own importance and value and distracts from the fact that they really aren't doing much of anything. There's always a guy in the gym who's grunting loudest over the least amount of weight. Often there's a direct connection between high volume and how paltry the effort. If people are doing great things, shaking things up, bucking the status quo, then of course there will be outcry and there will be under threat. However, if they're mostly doing jack shit, then the threat may have to be manufactured outright.
This past summer, I was in San Francisco doing a meet and greet with my podcast co-host, the SGU, and someone alerted me to the fact that, PZ actually alerted me to the fact that there was a person on a forum that was dedicated to hating me, and she was saying that she planned to attend the event in San Francisco and that she planned to approach me and accost me in some way. I just forwarded the information to the event organizer, and they immediately took her name off the wait list. I recently learned that another stalker of mine, a man who runs a blog and a Twitter account called Elevator Gate, lives in Florida, not too far from here. I got in touch with the humanists, and they listened to my concerns, and they said, you know, we're going to keep you safe. We're not going to let this person in. I thought that was an awesome response, and it's the reason why I'm here. Also, this past summer, can we get a round of applause for how awesome it was?
What's notable about the mastery of the threat narrative as shown by Rebecca Watson is that almost nothing she recounts is actually true. The forum she mentions is the Slime Pit, which originated in no small part due to Greg Laden's doxing and harassing of Abby Smith. To say the Slime Pit is dedicated to hating Rebecca Watson is like saying the sole purpose of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance is to piss off Fred Phelps. The person who runs the site Elevatorgate doesn't live in Florida. In fact, he's a resident of the UK and had no intention of attending the conference. As Watson was giving this talk in Florida, the fictional threat narrative is constructed to give the impression she is in imminent danger. The other person mentioned had no intention of accosting Watson unless ignoring Watson can be considered a form of assault, which to Watson it probably is. The person wasn't prevented from attending the conference and, in fact, was allowed to register under a pseudonym to protect her from Watson, who seems blissfully unaware of how little the people she works with think of her. The real danger in Watson's use of the clown horn threat narrative is that its limited success when presented to people who don't know any better but perhaps should has spawned a series of incompetent imitators. In this case, a weak-minded knockoff like Melody Hensley, as deconstructed here by
the Woolly Bumblebee.
Melody Hensley has recently embarked on a preemptive strike on Twitter against anyone she thinks may harass or threaten her. And by threaten or harass, she means anyone who may ask her honest and educated questions that oppose her feminist ideology and misandry. You may ask how she's going about accomplishing this preemptive strike on Twitter. Being well trained in the art of ducking and dodging, as well as possessing the Golden Feminist Survival Tactics badge, she put on her best pink and white military panties with matching combat boots and stormed the followers list from @ElevatorGate's Twitter account. From there, no one was spared, not even yours truly, who had never even given a shit about this little twat until today. But upon hearing about how she was blocking all these people that followed @ElevatorGate, I became intrigued as to what in the hell was going on with this woman.
In response, Hensley attempted to initiate a false flagging campaign against the video and doxing and harassment through false accusations against Christina Hansen, which makes Hensley's claim that she's the one being bullied like a message in a bottle from the alternative universe she apparently calls home. Now, none of that is surprising, as Melody Hensley appears to be not only a follower and imitator of Rebecca Watson, but, and talk about having no mind of your own, a confidant of Greg Laden. On Twitter, in the midst of Hensley's prolonged hissy fit, I made the painfully obvious remark that Hensley was following in Rebecca Watson's footsteps, where what matters is being part of the increasingly incestuous skeptical conference circuit. This appeared to get Hensley's attention, despite my being supposedly blocked like all the other bad people who don't idolize Rebecca Watson and hang with Greg Laden, who, it seems, was briefing Hensley. As Melody Hensley decided to be familiar with me on a Greg Laden and/or Ophelia Benson approved first name basis, I decided to be familiar right back. That may have been a tactical error, because no sooner had I made that remark, all Hensley's following creepiness was continually interrupted by a fellow Center for Inquiry member who, like Hensley, was in no way operating in his official capacity at CFI to give me grief about calling Hensley fat. Later, Hensley claimed that she gained weight while being sick and bedridden for 3 months. I have no idea if this is true, having only seen Hensley in person years ago, and she was about the same size back then. Also, when I lived in Arizona, I got a bad case of giardia from the water we had to have delivered to a 3,500-gallon tank. Thing about giardia is that it gives you the shit so bad that at first you think you're going to die. Then after a couple of weeks of it, you're afraid you're not going to die. I lost 20 pounds during the months it took for that to taper off and only missed a couple of days of work. So actually having the luxury of being laid up for 3 months is something well outside of my privileged experience. Anyway, back to the creepiness from this clown. Hensley goes through her litany of double-think contradictions, of calling me by my first name just to let me know she's in the mood to dox, then makes some ominous references to we knowing who I am, without ever revealing exactly who we is. Is we Freethought blogs? Is we the Skeptics? Is we the Center for Inquiry? Perhaps we is Ophelia Benson's journaling circle at the Women and Women First bookstore in Portland, or Greg Laden's Council of Ladies. The possibilities are endless. All the time, Melody Hensley, reading from the Clown Car Manual, claims I'm stalking her on Twitter after she supposedly blocked me and everyone associated with Elevatorgate. She even throws in the obligatory Elevatorgate in Florida claim of geographic proximity, just to show what an apt pupil she is. And then Hensley crosses a line from simply being a doxing and harassing twit into a full-on attempted bully. You see, like many people who work in Washington, D.C., I work within the federal government. That has nothing to do with the videos I do. In fact, the resources to make them exist only on my own computer at home. In fact, that's why it's taken me so long to get back on my feet making videos after my own computer bit the dust. But that's what Hensley means by getting the government involved. How clever. That is simply a blatant threat of employer harassing. And although Melody Hensley, with the tacit approval of Ron Lindsay, can continue to claim her threats and bullying are done outside the scope of her job, apparently I have no such reciprocal rights for my criticism of her. Maybe someday Ron Lindsay will take her being an absolute public relations disaster, an antithesis of the CFI mission statement, seriously. But perhaps not. Of course, someone like Hensley isn't going to contact my employer and say that, outside the scope of my employment, I've criticized her and hers for being shit skeptics, harassers, doxers, and bullies. Now, that's not how Melody Hensley operates. She will contact them and tell them I'm a harasser of women, a stalker and misogynist. Maybe a violent threat, all in an attempt to have me lose my job and have my life destroyed so she can continue to stand up at the podium at skeptical conferences and spout pure bullshit, and then head to the back table and do a full-on assault on the cheese Danish. I'm sorry, was that not nice? And then, like an abuser from Central Casting trying to make nice after getting her licks in, she proposes a truce. Does she mean a truce like with Justin Bakula, who she's still actively trying to prevent from attending the Women in Secularism conference through smears and innuendo, even though it's the stupidest, most petty thing she could do? Does she mean like the truce with the anti-vaxxer she prevented from attending a CFI talk because he made her feel uncomfortable? That kind of truce? But here's where it really gets weird. After Hensley did her doxing and threats, I answered her with this unequivocal response. She responded with this bright and chirpy little happy asshole response, which shows that she's not quite ready to drive the clown car all by herself. Luckily, help was at hand. After she and Greg Laden made their Twitter accounts private, apparently belatedly realizing that people can read their tweets while they're plotting, Melody Hensley re-emerged hours later to give me this tweet after I had already told her goodbye. Well, she's still learning. The question is, will Hensley or any of them make good on their threats? Well, after this video, definitely. Hensley, all of them in fact, are so petty and their egos so fragile that they can only abide unquestioning acceptance of their dogmatism, demand respect they haven't earned, and if earned, subsequently squandered, and on a good day might accept at bare minimum the tacit approval of silence. Criticism and consequences? That's for other, less enlightened people. Through the inimitable Frank Hoggle and the website Gray Lining, here's what you can expect from Laden, Benson, Watson, Hensley, and all the tooting little clowns in their clown car when you engage with them. First, they are habitual liars that will modify reality to suit them on a daily basis. I would qualify that. They will modify reality 30 seconds at a time to suit them. They are subject to Meyer's Law, where anything you communicate will be misinterpreted and used against you by any means possible. But most importantly, they are vicious, amoral sociopaths that can and will seek to harm you, your family, or your friends, personally and professionally, by any means available. They have no capacity for civilized response to either criticism or satire, and this is usually the only way they know how to respond. So I've got one more dog story for you that maybe will help you make sense of what's going on here. Back in Arizona, Rusty, being the smart one, would flush out the jackrabbits, and Daisy, who was incredibly fast and agile, could run them down even when they had a head start. Their teamwork decimated the local bunny population. One day I'm at work and I get a message from my girlfriend. When I call her back, she says, without any preamble, "You can wash your own dog." Well, okay. See, apparently Daisy the Great Hunter came across some still juicy cow remains, and being a dog, thought the best thing to do when faced with a cow carcass burst open by decomposition gases was to roll in it. When I got home, she was sitting by the front door, her back just matted with tacky, half-dried, rotting gore, entirely pleased with herself and patiently waiting to get back into the house. Daisy thought she was the most wrong dog on earth when I turned the hose on her. You see, dogs roll in dead things. Dogs roll in shit. It's not because they particularly like the smell, but when you fancy yourself a predator, you'll use whatever camouflage is available. And smelling like shit or dead things rather than like a predator is one form of camouflage. Normally, people wouldn't spray white-tailed doe urine on themselves, but if you're hunting bucks, there's an advantage to smelling like a doe rather than smelling like a Coors tall boy. You don't even have to worry about staying upwind. In fact, you kind of want what you're hunting to get a whiff of you. Or so I'm told. I've never hunted, ever. For predators, the trick is to look, sound, or even smell like something other than a predator. A doe, a dead thing, even a turd. And then they can, in the olfactory sense, hide in plain sight. You see where this is going? Atheism Plus, Freethought blogs, Skeptic, and certain members of the Center for Inquiry constantly claim to be harassed, threatened, stalked. They portray criticism as harassment. When questioned, act as if they were continually under threat when there's any push back against their own thoughtless and abusive behavior and treat responding to their claims or even reading them as stalking. That's not a mistake. That's not oversensitivity. That's not even, for the most part, pathology. It's a tactic. It's the strategy of predators rolling in shit and dead things to mask the fact that they are predators. What better way to threaten, harass, or even stalk people who disagree with you? They wear contrived victimhood like a clown wears grease paint and like a dog rolls in shit to conceal what they are. What confounds them, being cowards, is that some people's reaction to their threats and harassment will be not only to stand our ground, but to push back. Doxing, harassment, intimidation. Go ahead. I got some mocking with your name on it.
Homie, don't play that.